What is happening in Afghanistan? Who are the Taliban? Why are millions of people desperately trying to escape? What do the United States, the Soviet Union, the Cold War, Great Britain, Osama Bin Laden, and the attacks of 9/11 20 years ago have to do with everything that is currently happening in Afghanistan? If you don't live under a rock, surely you have already seen news or shocking images on social media about what is happening in Afghanistan. And although some are just learning about it, in reality, the conflict began many years ago. And it not only affects those who live in Afghanistan on the other side of the planet, because unfortunately what is happening in that country during these days represent a great danger for all of us in the rest of the world. My name is Alex Tienda. I am a travel blogger from Mexico, and a few months ago, my production team from Media Travelers and I decided for me to travel to Afghanistan to record a documentary about the history, the war, and the reality that people live in that country. But especially interested in documenting the situation that was lived inside the country at the time when half of the US Army had already withdrawn and the Taliban attacks against the Afghan army and civilians had already begun. If you want to know in depth the situation in Afghanistan, the history of the country, and how life was in Afghanistan until just a few days ago before it was captured by the Taliban, I invite you to watch my 10-episode documentary that I am currently uploading to my main YouTube channel, Alex Tienda, where I explain all of these topics in depth in a very easy to understand way. Now, if you're looking for a summary, in this video I'm going to summarize everything that's happening in Afghanistan so that in less than 15 minutes you can fully understand what's happening now, why it's happening, and what could happen next. So let's start by explaining what is happening in Afghanistan. Broadly speaking, a group of people called the Taliban took control of the entire country called Afghanistan, located in Central Asia, first by capturing some towns and provinces around the country, and then during the most recent days, capturing the main cities of the country like Kandahar, Herat, Mazar-i-Sharif, and finally the capital, Kabul. Okay, but who are the Taliban? Nowadays, and because of the media attention that has already been given to this issue, everybody is now commenting on the Taliban, some with accurate information and others a bit confused. But until a few days ago, there were still many people with the misconception that the Taliban was the name for the people who were born in Afghanistan, and this fact is obviously false. The people of Afghanistan are called Afghani, and within Afghanistan there are many ethnic groups such as the Uzbeks, Tajiks, Hazara, and Pashtuns, among others, with the Pashtuns being the largest and most dominant ethnic group in Afghanistan. And this is important for you to know because the Taliban emerged from the Pashtun ethnic group in southern Afghanistan in a city called Kandahar in 1994 during a civil war inside Afghanistan. And this fact is very important because this is where many are sharing false or misinformation about the origin of the Taliban by saying that the Taliban emerged during the Afghan-Soviet War and that they were funded, trained, and created by the United States, because in reality, although there is some truth to that, the so-called Afghan-Soviet War ended in 1989 and the Taliban group was created by a man named Mohammed Omar in 1994. But then what are people confused about? Because somehow the United States did have something to do with it, but not exactly by funding the Taliban, but the Mujahideen. Now this is where the story gets very interesting and complex, so please pay close attention to me. Something you should know about Afghanistan is that the region of the world in which this country is located has been involved in wars and disputes between the world's largest empires to control this territory for thousands of years now. The reason for that have varied throughout history. And although many think that the current conflict began in 1979 with the Afghan-Soviet War, in reality, the current problem of Afghanistan has its origins in other wars that happened several decades and even centuries before 1979. And in my full Afghanistan documentary, I explain this more in depth. But to focus now on the origin of the Taliban, we'll go back to the last century when the world was fighting a war between the United States and the Soviet Union known as the Cold War. A sort of continuation of the Second World War, in which the two great powers that emerged from World War II would now spend the next decades between 1945 and 1991 fighting to get the most territory around the planet. And it is called the Cold War because it was kind of a passive-aggressive war in which the protagonists, the United States and the Soviet Union, did not attack each other directly, but instead they used other countries and weaker territories to try to convince them, by hook or by crook, to align themselves with the political ideology of each of these two powers. On the one hand, the Soviet Union seeking to create a communist world, and on the other hand, the United States seeking to spread capitalism. This happened in Vietnam with the Vietnam War, in Berlin with the Berlin Wall, in Cuba, and in the Korean War, which I'm sure you know very well by now if you saw my documentary in North Korea that I filmed during my trip to that country. But besides these countries, Afghanistan was also one of the victims of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, since in 1979 the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan and took over its capital, Kabul. And with this, Afghanistan was now part of the Soviet Union. The big problem was that the Afghans had a very different culture and traditions from what the Soviets wanted to impose, mainly talking about religion, since the vast majority of Afghans were faithful followers of Islam, and the Soviet Union sought to implement atheism, or in other words, to eliminate the Afghans' religion. This logically caused great discontent among Muslim Afghans who saw the Soviet occupation as an attack and a threat against their beliefs, and for this reason, several groups of armed civilians emerged throughout the country and they called themselves Mujahideen, which translates to Islamic warriors, and the Mujahideen declare a jihad, or holy war, against the Soviets to get them out of their territory and defend Islam in their country. Now, what does the United States have to do with everything that is currently happening in Afghanistan? I'm going to answer this question in this part of the story because this is where the United States enters Afghanistan, and in this movie for the first time. As I had already told you, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan was part of a larger war called the Cold War, and the enemy of the Soviets in the Cold War was the United States. So when the Afghans Mujahideen themselves, in their attempt to defend their country, took up arms against the Soviets, the United States did not hesitate for a second to very discreetly help these guerrilla groups. But it was not only the United States, since for many other Islamic countries such as Saudi Arabia or Pakistan, the Soviet invasion also represented a direct threat to their religion. So several other countries, including of course the United States, began to send money, weapons, and training to the Mujahideen, who were not just one group but several guerrilla groups distributed in various regions of the country. And so, after 10 years of war between the Soviet Union and the Mujahideen, supported by the United States and other countries, in 1989, the Soviets finally surrendered and withdrew from Afghanistan. The big problem is that, as in almost any other war, once it is over, a new war usually begins to see who gets the new power. In the case of Afghanistan, when the Afghan-Soviet War ended in 1989, the Mujahideen, who used to fight together against a single enemy, were now fighting between each other to see who would take the power. This civil war between Afghan guerrilla groups lasted several years between 1989 and 1996, when the Taliban managed to conquer the capital of Kabul, just as they did a few days ago, and thus, in 1996, the Taliban ruled Afghanistan for the first time. But what's wrong with the Taliban, or why do all the people want to escape from Afghanistan now? To understand this, let's talk about the birth of the Taliban. As I was telling you, after the Soviets were removed from the country, there was a civil war between different guerrilla groups all over the country, and many of these guerrilla groups committed abuses and rapes towards the inhabitants of the villages they ruled. Such is the case in the city of Kandahar, where the Mujahideen went so far as to commit criminal acts, including the rape and murder of children, which greatly upset the population, but especially Muhammad Omar, a young student of Islam who gathered other fellow students and, in an act of revenge, killed those responsible and took control of Kandahar. This group called themselves Taliban, which translates to student, and at first they were supported by a large sector of the population, mainly in the south of Afghanistan, to defend and control the country from the oppressive Mujahideen. This is how, in 1996, they managed to capture Kabul and begin to rule Afghanistan, but little by little things changed. And to make a long story short, they began to apply a radical Islamic law called Sharia law throughout the country, and now the Taliban oppressed all the people who were not part of the Pashtun ethnicity to which they belonged, and above all, they committed abuses and atrocities on the Hazara people and on women. Under the Taliban rule, women no longer had the right to study, they could not work, they had to be completely covered from head to toe, and it was illegal for them to wear makeup. Entertainment, television, and many means of recreation was illegal. And if the woman was married, they could not leave the house without their husband. In addition to this, a millionaire man from Saudi Arabia named Osama Bin Laden, whose full story I will tell you about in my documentary, was received and protected by the Taliban to set up training camps within Afghanistan for their terrorist group called Al-Qaeda. This is how, in the late 90s, Osama Bin Laden planned and executed the first terrorist attacks against the United States, whom Osama Bin Laden hated for reasons that would take us a long time to explain. But that I will also tell you in detail within the documentary. But for now, it is enough for you to know that those first terrorist attacks from Osama Bin Laden were against US embassies in Africa and against a US military ship. But being events so far away geographically from the United States, many American citizens did not give any importance, and the vast majority did not even know about it until a couple of years later, on September 11th, 2001. On that day, the entire world witnessed one of the most tragic terrorist attacks in history.
Oh my God. My God.
And hours after the attack, Osama Bin Laden claimed responsibility for the attack, and the United States, furious, demanded revenge against this terrorist that until September 11, 2001, virtually no one had ever heard of. A few days after the attack, the then President of the United States of America, George W. Bush, demanded that the Taliban, who ruled Afghanistan at that time, handed over Osama Bin Laden and all members of the Al-Qaeda terrorist group. But the Taliban refused, arguing that Osama was a Muslim brother and they could not betray him. So the US declared a war not against Afghanistan but against terrorism and the Taliban rulers, and sent its army to capture and or kill the leaders of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. And this is where many people got confused over the years, because even today there are still many people who think that the United States was at war with Afghanistan and that they were invading a poor and innocent country, when in fact what the United States did in Afghanistan was to remove the Taliban regime from power and give women back their rights, along with the rest of the citizens, to give a respite of peace to the most vulnerable ethnic groups, and to hunt down and kill the Taliban and Al-Qaeda terrorists and leaders for more than 10 years. Although probably the fact that Afghanistan is the largest opium producer in the world has something to do with it. The problem now, and the reason why all of a sudden all this is back in the news, is because after 2011, when the US military managed to kill Osama Bin Laden, US citizens lost interest in that war and no longer saw a reason to be there. After Bin Laden's death, military operations became more focused on training and equipping the Afghan army to leave the country on their hands. But as the years went by, American citizens lost patience and became annoyed at having to spend tax dollars on this war. This is how President Barack Obama began with plans to withdraw the United States from Afghanistan. And then Trump negotiated with the Taliban that the final exit would be on May 1st, 2021, on the condition that the Taliban would behave well and would not commit terrorist attacks or abuses against civilians, which they did not comply with, obviously, from the beginning. But the United States did not seem to care at all, and above all, they were now more focused on making themselves look good to the electorate for the re-election of Donald Trump. In the end, Donald Trump lost the election, and the new President of the United States, Joe Biden, took up the withdrawal plan, but changed the deadline to September 11, 2021. Coincidentally, the date on which the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks would happen. Probably because in the US's mind, everything was going to be fine and it would become a historic event worth celebrating. However, by the month of May, when I visited Afghanistan, things inside the country were already getting very bad. More than half of the US military and allies were already withdrawn, and the Taliban were not complying with the peace agreement. And as soon as they saw the opportunity and felt the absence and disinterest of the United States to do something about it, they started attacking. First the most vulnerable towns, and then the medium-sized cities, and finally, with an impressive speed and aggressiveness, they attacked the main cities to finally capture Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan, and with this, the whole country for the second time in history. What is going to happen now? Actually, the future is still very uncertain, but also very bleak, as women in Afghanistan have just lost their rights for a start, having reverted to the Sharia law that the Taliban implemented 25 years ago when they first took over the country. Under this radical Islamic law, women have no right to study or work, nor they can leave their homes, and they must wear a burqa that covers them completely from head to toe. Makeup, television, and any means of entertainment are illegal and forbidden. Men without beards will be punished and imprisoned and tortured, and anyone who commits acts contrary to the Taliban's beliefs and laws could be punished with penalties as severe as public humiliation, mutilation, and executions. With all this and in general terms, we could say that for those who did not manage to escape and for millions of children who live and will be born in Afghanistan over the next few years, the chances of leading a dignified life have become practically non-existent. Now, what does this mean for the rest of us who live on the other side of the world? Many may not remember or may not be well aware, but in addition to the September 11, 2001 attacks in New York, Taliban-protected terrorist groups have perpetrated a host of other attacks around the world over the past 20 years, in places such as Belgium, Turkey, Paris, London, Indonesia, among others. And all of this could happen again if we consider that with the departure of the US military and the takeover of the Taliban in Afghanistan, the whole world has just gone back 25 years to the same point where it started, with the small but big difference that now the Taliban army has all the weapons, vehicles, and technology that the US left abandoned all over the country during its withdrawal. My name is Alex Tienda. I hope this video has been very helpful to know and understand the problem and risk under not only Afghanistan, but the whole world we live in. And if you like this video, please share it on all social media networks for all of those who still do not know the seriousness of the problem so they can better understand the situation. And if you're interested in learning more about the history and situation of this war, in addition to my experience being one of the last people to travel, tour and document the country of Afghanistan before it fell into the hands of the Taliban, do not miss my documentary series of 10 episodes that I'm currently uploading to my YouTube channel, Alex Tienda. And here below, I will leave you the direct links to the complete series and each one of the episodes.